Thank you to all the witnesses for appearing today. I'm going to start with Professor Warswick. So you talked about the way that the government has gone towards category-based selection, and then further talked about how they've added other factors like language. So is it fair to summarize your initial comments by saying we're doing it wrong?
I think we are moving in the wrong direction on immigrant selection. I think that's fair to say. I've focused on category-based selection and provincial nominee programs, but I think we had a model that was working quite well, and it was in place certainly through 2015, let's say, and the changes since then in general have been problematic in terms of selecting economic immigrants. I'm curious on the language, because I understand what you're saying that we have a lower score based on which language you speak. How do you integrate, for example, the French language then into selection of people based on using the you talked about greater than average earnings or whatever category? How do you integrate language into something like that? Well, I think we have a comprehensive ranking system that applies to many of but not all of the economic programs. I think that needs to be updated. It was meant to be a rolling update process, but when it was originally created, economists at StatCan, I believe, looked at earnings of immigrants up to that point and said what factors seem to affect earnings performance. So you could go back and do that again, and if you find that French language fluency raises earnings appreciably in Vancouver, then that should be part of the process. But it should be a data-driven exercise. And so, I think skill has become controversial, what skill is. But what economists think about as human capital is usually measured in terms of earnings. And I would suggest we could take a lot of the politics out of it by agreeing on what the policy goals are and then let the data drive it. I believe 3 years ago I saw an article that you wrote where you essentially warned the government that a crisis was coming. Am I correct in that? And what was the logic of that? The article I referenced with Mikhail Skruder and Matt Doyle was something we started around that time, so it's possible it was an early version of that paper. I think we were concerned about the growing numbers, the growing level of permanent immigration. Now, I think what ended up becoming a bigger problem was the extraordinary growth of the temporary migration, but I think both changes combined really led to, a surge in the population, which is really unprecedented since the 50s anyways. And I think it strained our ability to settle. I'm sympathetic to my colleague here's challenges. It must be extremely difficult. So I think it's a mixture of levels, which I know is a different part of the study, but also selection, right? And I think, my colleague here mentioned completely correctly that, labor force growth is going to come from immigration. But it's not just the number of workers that matters, it also is earnings. Like if we're trying to fund social programs, it's not the number of people, it's how successful they are. And I just want to really make clear that I'm talking about economic programs. I strongly support refugee programs, and we need services to support refugees and family class. I just like to see us need them less for economic immigrants. So you mentioned levels, so let's talk a bit about that. Do you think that our levels should be constrained by things like housing availability and those types of things? I think the levels, ideally, the short answer is yes, I think it should. But if we should be able to build housing and we should be able to build healthcare to match immigration, but we've struggled to do that, certainly in the last 20 years. I said that one of the rules of thumb that we've come up with is to say, well, look at your pool of applicants and take the economic principal applicants you think 10 years from now are going to have earnings above average. Well, that assumes that you can build homes if there's a large number of people. If you can't, then it's hard to see why this, I think you would trim back the level. Not drastically cut, but you'd have an adjustment factor. Mr. Amasu, we have approximately 3 million temporary residents in our country right now. The government has many plans to essentially expire their paperwork, and then they expect them to leave the country. In your experience, when a temporary residence
paperwork expires, essentially, do they leave the country, or do you run into folks who hang around after their paperwork has expired?
Yeah, if they have a temporary resident permit, what end up happening most of the time is that they tend to not leave. But when compelled, they do so. And most of the time, they will go try to fight and then claim that they have a right to stay here. And as a rule of thumb from IWC, we encourage them to abide by the rules, meaning when it is time to leave and you have expired whatever means you can use to
30
appeal,
seconds.
just leave.
So, from a realistic perspective, is it realistic for the government to expect these people to leave the country, or, as you said, are they just going to try to find a way to stay?
I think they should go by the rules. So the expectation is that if they have exhausted time,
Right.
they should leave.
Okay, but they should. But in your experience, will they?
Yeah, they do. Some do.
Some.
Yes.
But not all.
Most of the time, they won't do it, yes. But
Most
some
of
we
the-
do.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Redekop. Thank you, Mr. Amosul. Next, we have 5 minutes for Mr. Peter Fredescatos.
Thank you.
So sorry, 6 minutes.
That's fine, Madam Chair. No problem. Professor Worswick, thank you very much for being here today. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I think we're all hockey fans at this table. It's very Canadian game, obviously by definition. I think analogies have their place. But if I take your analogy to its logical conclusion, look, you're talking about ultimately differences of degree and not kind. And what I mean by that, if we're going to continue down that path of the analogy, a right winger and a centerman are different, but not really. I mean, they're hockey players in the end. And if we're thinking about the economy and the place of the immigration system in helping to build up that economy, where obviously individuals can't be sourced, we're talking about skills, individuals can't be sourced domestically, then I think your analogy and your overall argument, frankly, might be out of place. Just tell me a little bit more, because I'm a bit confused on the rationale. I say this with great respect. If we're trying to fulfill skills gaps, if we're trying to address rather skills gaps in the economy, obviously you're going to want people of various backgrounds, including income types. The trades is a challenge. It's hard to source people in the trades. To give one example, you talk to business owners in rural and remote communities. They have a very difficult time finding people. And so if we're going to source people of only one income type, or in a certain category of income, if you like, then I think we're going to run into problems. The immigration system should serve the economy first and foremost.
Answer?
Yeah, of course.
So, okay, really quickly, I know there's not a lot of time. So, in the absence of an immigration program, when there's excess demand for workers, the wages should rise. That's what Adam Smith wrote in The Wealth of Nations. And my experience is, if a job has chronic labor shortages, usually it's because there's something to do with the job that people don't like. And so this idea that we should have immigrants do the jobs Canadians don't want to do, I think is a huge mistake, because the wages will never rise if that's the case. So, I think and like my colleague, Mikhail Skruderud, has put out numbers on construction. Everyone's always saying there's construction shortages, but we do not see wages rising rapidly in construction.
Sir, I have limited time. I don't want to interrupt you, and in fact, I'd be quite happy to follow up after the meeting. But what would you tell, for example, members of Parliament from Atlantic Canada, who in their communities have fish processing plants, to give you an example? The problem with those plants is not that they're not getting orders. They're getting many orders from across Canada, from across the world. They can't fill those orders because they have such a challenge getting access to workers.
Right, and I'm sure that they feel that way, but let me please answer.
It's not that they feel that way. This is an objective fact.
Can I answer the
It's a
question?
fact. So
you keep interrupting me.
No, I'm just putting
normal?
facts on the record. If we're going to have a discussion.
Fredescatos, just please allow the witness to respond, please.
So the wages should rise until local people or people from Ontario or people from BC want to move there to do the jobs, or the companies invest in new technology. Right? These fish plants, companies, like we have temporary foreign workers coming in to work in fast food restaurants in Toronto. Are there not workers in Toronto? The wages have to rise, and what that does raises wages for low-income Canadians, and it reduces income inequality.
I take your point, sir, on Toronto and in particular the fast food sector. But you're telling me that the fish plant, an example that I gave, we're going to tell the entrepreneurs that run those places that they should wait for workers from Ontario, so Canadians from Ontario, to move out there.
I started off by saying,
at some point they'll realize that they suddenly want to go work in Atlantic Canada in a fish processing plant.
I said local workers could take the jobs first.
That's the challenge.
Because the wage hasn't risen yet.
Okay, so that's the answer to this. Just
that is the answer.
Increase wages.
That's
and
what we did in Canada for the first
fall
100
in
years,
place.
right? We didn't have temporary foreign worker programs. Okay. And on your other question about left wing, right wing, center, I had a look at the public use census file today for 2021. I restricted it to economic immigrants in Canada. If you compare economic immigrants who work in French in Canada outside Quebec to all other immigrants, economic immigrants who work in English and any other language, their earnings are 20% lower. That's straight from the census. So there's real costs to these policies we're laying over top, and that means that they're paying less taxes, they may need more services, and that's costing Canadians.
1 minute.
Thank you. As I said, Professor Worswick, happy to follow up with you afterwards. Merci d'être ici, Monsieur Ramassou. Premièrement,
Mr. Ramassou, thanks for being here. We are a bilingual country, and we are very proud with this fact. Do you think that the immigration system plays an important role in this vision? Absolutely, because being a country with 2 official languages puts the IRCC in a position to promote both languages. You can have programs to learn English and programs to learn French. It is an exceptional opportunity that Canada is offering, investing in language training of newcomers. It's very important. And I always tell people we should try to be bilingual or multilingual. It is really a good asset to have, and that is something the IRCC takes also into account, training in the both official languages of the country.